"Where's the birthday lady?" Someone laughed, raising a crystal flute. Then the music swelled and the question died in everyone's throat. Inside the Hartwell estate, everything glittered, chandeliers spilling warm gold onto marble floors, designer gowns brushing past tailored suits, and a string quartet smoothing the air into something expensive. It was billionaire Damien Blackwood's birthday, and the party was engineered to look flawless, like nothing ugly could exist beneath it. Yet one absence haunted the room. Elena Blackwood, 7 months pregnant, was nowhere to be seen. When a guest finally asked, Damien didn't blink. "She's resting upstairs," he said with a practiced smile. Beside him stood Vivian Cross, in a wine-red dress, leaning in like she belonged there, too close, too confident. The guests accepted the lie because it was easier than questioning a powerful man in his own palace. But the truth wasn't upstairs. It was below, behind a locked metal door in a freezing basement where Elena's hands shook against bare concrete and her breath came shallow with fear. She had no phone, no keys, only the distant echo of laughter above her head and the dull, growing pain in her abdomen. Down in the service corridor, housekeeper Monique Johnson, a black woman who'd learned to move silently in rich houses, heard something that didn't match the celebration, a weak, uneven whisper. Every instinct told her to walk away. Instead, she found the spare key, turned the lock, and opened the door that Damien believed no one would touch. Monique called emergency services. Sirens arrived. The party stopped. And as Elena was carried out on a stretcher, Damien's perfect world cracked, exposed in front of every witness he thought money could silence. The door slammed with a sound that didn't echo. It ended things. Not just the argument. Not just the moment. Something inside Elena Blackwood fractured when the lock slid into place from the other side. At first, she stood there stunned, one hand pressed to the cold metal, the other instinctively cradling her stomach. The basement smelled of damp concrete and old dust, a sharp contrast to the perfume and polished wood upstairs. A single yellow bulb flickered overhead, weak and unreliable, casting long shadows that made the room feel smaller, tighter, as if the walls themselves were leaning in. "Elena, stop this," Damien's voice had said, moments earlier, calm, controlled, final. Then his footsteps faded upward, swallowed by music and applause. She knocked once. Then again. Harder. Her voice bounced back at her, thin and powerless. No answer came. Above her, a party bloomed laughter, clinking glasses, the rise and fall of music carefully chosen to impress. The cruelty of it sank in slowly, celebration layered directly on top of her silence. The floor seeped cold through the soles of her shoes. When she realized her purse was gone, her phone, her keys, panic didn't explode. It crept, slow, heavy, relentless. She lowered herself to the ground, back against the wall, breathing the way her doctor had taught her, counting each inhale as if numbers could keep fear at bay. Her baby shifted faintly beneath her palm. "I'm here," she whispered, unsure if she was speaking to the child or to herself. "I won't let anything happen." Time behaved strangely in the basement. Minutes stretched, then collapsed into each other. The pain in her abdomen came and went, soft at first, then sharper, more deliberate. She tried standing, legs trembling, the room tilting just enough to force her back down. Sweat cooled on her skin. Her teeth chattered. Above her head, applause erupted. That was when understanding hardened into something colder than fear. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't anger that had gone too far. Damien had chosen this chosen image over humanity, control over care, a flawless party over his pregnant wife. Tears slipped down Elena's temples, silent and hot. She pressed her forehead to her knees, wrapping her arms around herself, making her body smaller, as if that might protect the life inside her. Each distant laugh from upstairs felt like a betrayal repeated. She didn't know how long she could stay awake. She didn't know if anyone would come. The bulb flickered again, threatening darkness. And yet somewhere beyond the music, beyond the lies and locked doors, fate was already shifting. A sound she couldn't hear yet was moving closer. A door that was never meant to open was about to be touched. But for now, Elena waited in the cold, holding on to breath, to heartbeat, to the fragile hope that truth once found cannot be buried forever. "You're ruining everything," Damien Blackwood said quietly. And that was when Elena knew this was no longer a conversation, it was a verdict. Just hours before the guests arrived, the house had been filled with light and preparation. Staff moved quickly. Floral arrangements were adjusted, glasses aligned with surgical precision. Elena had stood near the window, one hand resting on her swollen belly, trying to steady a feeling she couldn't name. Then she saw the dress. Deep wine red. Elegant. Not hers. Never meant for her. The unease that followed tightened in her chest like a warning she was too late to escape. When she asked who it was for, Damien barely looked up. "Vivian will be here tonight," he said, as if announcing a seating arrangement, not quietly, not discreetly, publicly, proudly. The words struck harder than she expected. Elena reminded him softly at first that she was his wife, that she was pregnant, that people were already watching. She told him it would humiliate her. She asked him to reconsider. Damien's patience thinned with every sentence. He told her she was being dramatic, then careless, then finally unnecessary. "You're not useful in public like this," he said, eyes flicking to her stomach with open disdain. Fragile doesn't photograph well. Something broke loose in her then. She raised her voice not to scream, but to be heard. She accused him of cruelty, of betrayal, of choosing spectacle over family. For a moment, Damien looked startled, as if resistance itself offended him. Then his face hardened into something cold and resolved. "I need you out of sight," he said, "just until the party is over." Before Elena could react, his hand closed around her arm. Not wild, not sloppy, controlled, calculated. She stumbled, one hand flying to protect her belly as he steered her away from the light, down corridors that grew colder with every step. She begged. She promised silence. She promised obedience. None of it mattered. At the basement door, she understood fully and too late. Damien pushed her inside. The door slammed. The lock turned. Now, alone in the cold hours later, Elena replayed every second with brutal clarity. This wasn't anger. It wasn't impulse. It was a decision. Damien had weighed his options and chosen the one where she disappeared, where the other woman stood beside him, where his image remained intact. Above her, laughter continued. Glasses clinked. Applause rose. The truth settled in her chest, heavier than fear. She had not been locked away by accident. She had been removed, erased, silenced. And in that silence, Elena made a quiet vow, one she didn't yet know how to keep, that if she survived this night, the truth would not stay buried with her in the dark. The house was trained to be quiet for people like Monique Johnson. She had learned that early, how wealth demanded silence from those who served it. Move softly. Don't ask questions. Don't look too long at what didn't belong to you. That night, Monique pushed her cleaning cart through the lower corridors of the Blackwood estate with the same discipline she always carried, the music from upstairs thudding faintly through layers of stone and marble. Laughter drifted down in fragments, warped and distant like a celebration happening in another world. She was nearly finished when she heard it. At first, she thought it was the house settling. Old estates groaned when crowded with guests. But then the sound came again. Uneven. Strained. Too human to ignore. Monique stopped, her fingers tightening around the cloth in her hand. She held her breath and listened. Beneath the music, beneath the walls, there was something else. A whisper that wasn't meant to be heard. Fear arrived quickly, sharp and practical. This was not her place. Powerful families protected their secrets, and people like her paid the price for noticing them. She told herself to move on, to keep walking, to finish her shift, and forget the sound ever existed. But then she heard it again, closer this time. A soft knock. Weak. Desperate. Monique's chest tightened. She thought of Elena Blackwood, the pregnant woman she hadn't seen all evening. The one who always smiled at the staff, who remembered names, who once asked Monique if her feet hurt after long shifts. The pieces slid together with a sickening clarity. The sound was coming from the basement door. Monique stood there for a long moment, staring at the cold metal surface. The lock was engaged, from the outside. Her heart pounded so loudly she was sure someone would hear it. This was a line one that once crossed could never be uncrossed. She imagined Damien Blackwood's face when he found out. The loss of her job. Worse. Then another sound slipped through the door. Not words, just breath. That was enough. Her hands shook as she hurried to the storage cabinet where spare keys were kept. Keys she had never touched without permission. Tonight, permission felt meaningless. She found the right one by instinct, metal biting into her palm, as if reminding her of the cost. Back at the door, she hesitated only once. Then she turned the key. The lock gave way with a soft click that sounded impossibly loud. When Monique pushed the door open, cold air rushed out, carrying the smell of concrete and fear. The dim light revealed Elena collapsed against the wall, one arm wrapped around her stomach, her skin pale, her breathing shallow. "Oh my God," Monique whispered, dropping to her knees. In that moment, fear burned away, replaced by something stronger, clarity. This wasn't gossip. This wasn't scandal. This was a woman trapped, a life in danger. Monique reached for her phone, and with that single choice made in a forgotten corridor beneath a perfect party, she began to tear the truth out of the dark. The sirens arrived first, low distant, almost mistaken for part of the music until they weren't. At the height of Damien Blackwood's birthday celebration, as crystal glasses hovered mid-toast and laughter spilled beneath the chandeliers, a ripple of confusion moved through the crowd. Heads turned. Conversations thinned. Red and blue light flickered briefly across the tall windows, cutting through the gold glow of luxury, like a warning no one wanted to acknowledge. Damien stood near the center of the room, champagne still in his hand, his smile frozen in place. For a moment he convinced himself this had nothing to do with him. A neighbor. A coincidence. Anything but the truth clawing its way upward from beneath his feet. The front doors swung open. Cold night air rushed in, carrying urgency with it. 2 paramedics entered first, focused and unflinching, followed closely by uniformed police officers whose presence immediately shattered the illusion of celebration. The music stopped mid-note. Silence fell hard and absolute. "What is this?" Damien demanded, stepping forward, irritation sharpening his voice. Authority had always answered him before. "This is an emergency response," one officer replied evenly. "We need everyone to remain where they are." Then the stretcher appeared. A collective gasp rippled through the room as Elena Blackwood was wheeled into view. Her skin was pale beneath the harsh lights, her body wrapped in a white blanket that could not hide the dirt-stained blue fabric beneath. One hand rested protectively over her stomach, fingers curled as if holding on to the only certainty she had left. Whispers erupted. Shock, horror, disbelief. Damien's glass slipped from his hand and shattered against the marble floor, the sound sharp and final. He stared at Elena as though seeing her for the first time, not as something to be managed, but as evidence he could no longer control. "That's my wife," he said weakly. "There's been some kind of mistake." No one answered him. Walking beside the stretcher was Monique Johnson. Her uniform rumpled her face, set with a quiet resolve that outshone every diamond in the room. She didn't look at the guests. She didn't look at Damien. Her eyes stayed on Elena, her presence steady grounding. As the stretcher paused briefly in the center of the hall, Elena's eyes fluttered open. Confusion passed over her face as she took in the chandeliers, the crowd, the life she had been erased from. Then she saw Damien. They locked eyes. Elena didn't speak. She didn't have to. Everything lived in that look. Fear, pain, betrayal, and something else too. Truth unfiltered and undeniable. Damien looked away first. The stretcher moved on. Behind it, the party collapsed into chaos. Guests raised phones without shame. Murmurs turned into accusations. The image Damien had built so carefully, wealth, power, perfection, crumbled in real time under the weight of what had been revealed. As the doors closed behind the paramedics and sirens surged once more into the night, one thing became clear to everyone watching: no amount of money could drown out the sound of the truth when it finally broke free. The celebration did not end, it collapsed. By the time the ambulance disappeared beyond the gates of the Blackwood estate, the mansion no longer felt like a palace, but a crime scene wrapped in crystal and shame. Guests were escorted out in uneasy clusters, heels clicking too loudly against marble floors that only hours earlier had promised glamour and power. Conversations were hushed now, fractured, every whispered sentence carrying the same question. How could this happen here? Police officers moved through the house with calm precision, their presence stripping the space of illusion. The basement door remained open, exposed at last. Photographs were taken. The lock was tested. The cold was measured. Everything that had been hidden was now methodically documented. Truth did not need drama. It only needed light. Damien Blackwood sat rigidly in the grand hall. Shoulders tense, his expensive suit suddenly ill-fitting. He tried to speak more than once, tried to explain, to regain control with words he had always trusted. But authority did not respond the way it used to. Each attempt was met with quiet redirection, each excuse shrinking under the weight of evidence. Security footage sealed what denial could not undo. Officers watched in silence as the screen revealed Damien's hand gripping Elena's arm, guiding her down the corridor, opening the basement door, pushing her inside, turning the lock. There was no sound, but none was needed. The timestamps told the rest. Hours of confinement, hours of risk. When the handcuffs closed around his wrists, the sound was small, but it echoed louder than the music ever had. Outside, cameras flashed. Reporters gathered. Headlines began forming before dawn. The image of a powerful man being led from his own home traveled fast, unburdened by sympathy. Wealth could no longer soften what had been seen. Inside the hospital, Elena lay under white lights wrapped in warmth at last. Doctors moved efficiently, voices low and steady. Hypothermia, dehydration, stress-related complications. Every diagnosis carried the same unspoken truth: this had been avoidable. A monitor pulsed with a sound that anchored her, her baby's heartbeat strong and steady, refusing to surrender. Monique Johnson gave her statement carefully, hands folded, voice calm despite the tremor beneath it. She did not exaggerate. She did not minimize. She simply told the truth. And in doing so, she became something the Blackwood world had never anticipated: undeniable. By morning, the consequences spread outward like cracks in glass. Accounts were frozen. Boards called emergency meetings. Partners released statements distancing themselves from Damien's actions. Influence evaporated faster than champagne bubbles. And yet amid the wreckage, one thing endured. Elena survived. Her child survived. And the silence that once protected power had been broken not by wealth, not by status, but by one woman who refused to look away. The night that began as a birthday ended as a reckoning, and nothing in the Blackwood name would ever mean the same again. Morning light entered the hospital room, quietly filtered through pale curtains that softened its weight. Elena Blackwood lay on her side, one hand resting over her stomach, feeling the steady rhythm beneath her palm. The fear had not vanished, but it no longer ruled her breath. For the first time since the basement door had closed, the world felt still, instead of threatening. Machines hummed gently. Nurses moved with calm assurance. Each sound was ordinary, and that ordinariness felt like mercy. Her eyes closed and memories surfaced, not as sharp blades anymore, but as distant echoes. The cold floor, the locked door, the laughter above. They were still part of her story, but they no longer defined its ending. She had survived not because of power or protection, but because someone had chosen to see her when it was easier to look away. Later that day, Monique Johnson stood hesitantly in the doorway. She no longer wore a uniform, just simple clothes, hands folded nervously. When Elena saw her, something inside her loosened. She reached out slowly. Monique took her hand, holding it with both of hers. "Thank you," Elena whispered. The words were small, but they carried the weight of 2 lives. Monique shook her head gently. "You're safe," she said. "That's what matters." Outside the room, the world was still loud news reports, court dates, opinions. Inside, there was only breathing heartbeat and the fragile beginning of healing. Elena closed her eyes again, knowing the road ahead would be long, but also knowing this truth with certainty. The darkness had been exposed, and she was no longer alone in it. This story reminds us of something painfully real. Power thrives in silence, but it collapses the moment someone chooses courage over comfort. Evil doesn't always look loud or violent. Sometimes it hides behind smiles, wealth, and celebration. And justice often begins with one ordinary person who decides, "I will not look away." Be that person. Speak up. Notice. Act, especially when it feels risky. If this story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters more than you think. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, subscribe to the channel, because truth once heard can change lives.